Never, ever use brass compression fittings on brake lines. The humble brass compression fitting. They're cheap, readily available, and quite easy to use, making them a favorite for repairing lines in many, many applications. But they're not suitable for all applications. So we had this 1975 MG in for some repair work, and we found these compression fittings on the brake lines. Now it doesn't matter whether we're talking in a British car, Italian, American, German, Japanese, doesn't matter. It applies to all of them. I'm going to say something here that is controversial, and I know it's controversial because of my past experience. Never, ever, ever use brass compression fittings on brake lines. These two lines here, one of these goes to the rear brakes, the other goes to the right front. This is a failure waiting to happen. Now I know that's going to be a controversial opinion because I spent enough time behind a parts counter talking to mobile mechanics and other backyard mechanics and even mechanics at shops who insist that these are just fine and you can use them. But I'm going to tell you here today why you shouldn't. So the fittings I have here right now are from Dorman. You can buy these at pretty much any parts store. This is 3/16, most common size on brake lines. Now, if you look up the Dorman site, they will actually say, do not use these on brake lines or braking systems. Why? Well, I did some research on brake pressures and the amount of pressure these fittings can hold. Now, I spent several hours doing all this research, and I had a bit of difficulty finding some really good, accurate numbers. Now, it seems the more reputable the company was, as in they specialize in fittings and fittings only, the broader range they gave on what the pressure ratings on these were. And I can understand exactly why, because the final pressure rating on these things can vary depending on a number of different variables from how they're installed, what lines they're installed on, how dirty they were, if there's rust, contamination, whatever. So if you're putting them on a rusty brake line, got pitting in it, which is really common, how far are you going to go? Because some of these cars, the lines are really hard to access, so people want to go ahead and, not go too far up the line because it's so hard to get into them. So if there's any kind of rust on them, it's going to reduce the performance of these. Plus, you can both over-tighten them and under-tighten them. But what's the right tightness? How tight do you go with them? Go look that up, see what you can find on it. And have you ever seen anybody put a crow's foot on a torque wrench and tighten these? I never have. So what kind of numbers were I finding on these? Well, for a 3/16 fitting, I was seeing a range of 250 to 400 psi, depending on how well they were installed. And that is for no lead brass fittings. And that's important because when you're dealing with stuff like this, that's made in, say, India or China or various other places, which most of the stuff is going to be these days, brass can have some percentage of lead in it, and who knows if they're actually sticking with the rules as they're supposed to or mixing some lead in with them. The more lead content, the less pressure they can hold. Now, what kind of braking pressures are we talking about in a car? Well, after that research, the best I was able to come up with was average stopping. Moderate pressure would be around 300 to 600 psi. We're already exceeding the rating limits of these before you even factor in a panic stop. Now, panic stops in my research said can exceed 1400, more than 3 times the rated capacity of this thing. Now, when I saw 1400 psi, I wasn't actually surprised at all. I was actually expecting a higher number than that. The reason is because I used to work with somebody when I was working behind the parts counter with a guy that previously had worked at a company that did brake system testing. And monitoring the brake pressure was part of their daily procedures. They had an actual car, stopping, testing brake pads, rotors, all that stuff. And he gave me some numbers, which I don't remember the exact numbers, but I do remember the numbers he gave me far exceeded 1,400 PSI that they saw regularly on panic stops. And I remember that because I was actually quite surprised by the number he told me and actually was questioning it, and I would not have questioned 1,400 PSI. Now, when I spent some time behind the parts counter, plenty of guys come in trying to buy these things. And I would ask them, you're not using that on a brake system, are you? And they're like, yes, I am. I'm like, well, don't use those. Why not? I use them all the time. They work fine. Mobile mechanics, shade tree mechanics, always arguing this stuff with me, tell me they can use it, it's fine, no big deal. And they weren't going to spend more than the $2 or $3 a fitting that this costs. Bad idea, as you can tell. Now, if you're insistent that you want to use these compression fittings, there is a better fitting available. Now, this one is a Dorman, right here. Now, it still says on the back of the package, not recommended for hydraulic brake systems. But if you look up the numbers on these, they do say up to 5,000 PSI. But they say that for all size fittings, so where would the 3/16 fall at? I don't know. But if you're insistent on using a compression fitting, use this type because it will hold a heck of a lot more pressure. Now, I do know this brass fitting, I'm in the state of Ohio. The state of Ohio still frowns upon the use of these. They don't like to see them, but they absolutely will fail your car on inspection with one of these. You will not be driving your car anymore until you fix it. Now, all over the internet, I am seeing videos. Oh yeah, you can use these. Use these. Let me show you how to put them on your car. Quick search on YouTube, plenty of videos about it. Do not listen to them. Do not follow their advice. There's a huge price difference between these two. Usually, what, $2, $3 a piece. These are like $5, $6 a package for two of them. These are around $16, $17 each, but they are built quite differently. This is not brass, this is steel. Now you can also buy stainless steel as well. But now let's look at the difference in how they're made. This is your typical, just tapered ferrule. You know, you put your line in there, this compresses down, squeezes onto the line as this is tightened. This one is made a bit differently. This is what the ferrule looks like. There is a interference fit here, a slight taper here where it starts, and then as this goes on, it pushes it down, and once it seats here, it is fully compressed and getting your maximum clamping pressure. This will hold a whole lot more pressure than these are. And don't you think it's worth $13 more for a fitting to not lose your brakes and potentially kill yourself or somebody else? Now, I have never used any kind of brass fittings ever on any brake lines. I have considered the use of these, and I actually did talk to the owner of this particular car. Said, if you want to keep it cheap and don't want to spend much money, we could put these on. At least the pressure rating is within the range that you should be okay, even though the state does frown upon it. But he said, no, put all new lines on it. I'm not screwing around with brakes. That's the way you think about brakes. Now, the other way to do it is you can replace the line completely from end to end. And that can be really difficult to do, obviously, on newer cars. But the other way to do it is to flare the end of the line. So obviously the best way to do it is to flare the line and use one of these couplings. This is an extremely suitable way of doing it. Of course, you'll have to get you some flare nuts to do it, to fit whatever you're working on. And you need to note that these things are not only metric and SAE, but also bubble flare or double flare. You need to get the right stuff for your application. But how are you going to flare that line? So we have a couple different flaring tools here. This one's meant to be put in a vise. Obviously, you're not going to be able to use this under the car. Very good tool here. This works really, really well. But you have to take the line off, get it over to the workbench in order to use it. And if you're going to take the line off that far, you might as well just put all new line on. So then you got these. These are much more affordable. They're also a complete pain in the butt to use. I hate these things. I bought this years ago. I almost never get it out because it almost always slides down the line. It's hard to use. I do not like these. I know a lot of people have good luck with them. I prefer to use this all day long over even getting this out of the drawer. But there's also this thing. This is intended to be used under the car for exactly this reason. When you're repairing lines under the car and you don't want to take them out. Very small, fits in the tight spaces, but these are sold each for the lines. Now these are about 45 bucks, something like that, but it's still well worth it when you consider what we're dealing with here. I've never used this one. It's a recent purchase for me. I do know a friend who has one of these. He likes it, says it works really, really well. So now as for the line itself, you can get just zinc-coated line, or you can get this green stuff here. Now this is actually multi-layer line, and it's very rust and corrosion resistant. Lasts a lot longer than that stuff will, and this stuff can actually be manipulated by hand quite a bit easier without kinking it, as long as you're careful. Then you also have what they call cupro nickel, which has a lot of, it's a copper-based line with a lot of nickel in it, and it's actually OEM on a lot of high-end German cars. So it is perfectly acceptable to use this, and this stuff can be bent quite easily and worked. But when you're buying this line like this, in the straight sections, they don't tend to flare very well. My Eastwood tool here, which is sold under a ton of different names, I've had various difficulties trying to do this line with this tool. What we get is it tries to double stack on you like that. And you might do it 2-3 times, cut it off, cut it off, cut it off, and then it works. I have not had that problem with the rolls of line though, only with these straight ones. And I even called Eastwood once and talked to them about it. They said we've never had a problem with it. They were working off rolls, no problem. Went and bought some of this at a store, had the same problem I did. So if you're planning on flaring your own fittings or cutting the line down to the right length, maybe you should go ahead and stick with the green stuff, because I've never had this stuff fail to flare in this tool. So in conclusion, just like with so many other things in life, there's no free lunch. A cheap shortcut is just that, a cheap shortcut. That could lead to a failure, which could lead to much bigger problems than spending an extra 10 or 15 bucks here and there. You could end up crippled, maimed, or dead. So always do brakes the right way. And when I mean right, it's not just using the right fittings and not shortcutting with fittings like this. Also, when you're putting brake calipers on, do both sides. Don't do just one, because if you put one brand new caliper on this side and one old caliper on this side, not only could the old caliper here fail very soon after you replace this one, because they're both the same age, likely to fail, the new caliper could be working a lot easier, freer than the old caliper. That could lead to you losing control in inclement weather. and causing an accident. Same thing with rear wheel cylinders on drum brakes. So be safe out there. Do it right, or don't do it at all.